So, yeah, so we're going to continue on. And what I'm going to do in this session today, we'll continue reading from the Leadership for an Age of High Consciousness 2 book. But we're also going to touch upon some of these points and expand upon certain ideas. So what we've been doing so far is talking about, well, we began by talking about the 10 principles of leadership. And we explained how these are derived from different ancient scriptural statements and how they constitute the entire science of leadership. We deliberately started the session by giving those 10 principles. And the reason is because everything that you're going to hear afterwards is an elaboration. Okay, so the Vedas work like that, and people need this actually. Things are often best if it's simple at heart, and then you can expand on it, right? So if you want to get into all the detail, it's there. But if you don't, and you just want to know, like, what are the key things I need to remember? Okay, 5, 10, whatever, done, end of story. Okay, so think of anything that we discussed today as an elaboration of what we've discussed previously, okay? And those first 10 things are like the different buckets. And then you can add all the detail into those particular areas. So we also in a previous session talked about different types of society, right? So whether it's capitalistic, democratic, etc., etc. And Prabhupada would often use this word, demon crazy. How many of you have heard that term before? Yeah. So Prabhupada would often use that when he's talking about democracy. But why? Does anyone remember why Prabhupada would say that? Yes.
If you're not elevated yourself, what possibility do you have of picking somebody that is elevated also? So basically, pick somebody who resonates with your low level of consciousness.
Yeah. Absolutely. Prabhupada, he also elaborated on that. He said, whichever dog barks loudest, right? The big dog is one that actually gets selected. So all the small dogs, they bow down to the big dog. It doesn't actually matter whether the person actually cares about society, cares about people, makes no difference. The fact that that person has more power, money, influence, marketing, whatever it is, they get their way. Yeah. In Kali Yuga, unfortunately, this is how it is. In Kali Yuga, the money rules, right? Cash rules. Okay, so everyone's thinking in that way and they can be easily manipulated. There's a lot of studies that talk about, there's a term called regulatory capture. So for example, in some industries, they can lobby the government to get what they want. Yeah, and it's very clever. I saw something the other day, and it was talking about how sometimes the most powerful and wealthiest individuals, they can lobby the government to make laws which have specific loopholes that they can get around. You see how it works, right? So then on the one hand, so that it was about American society. So they were saying that the richest people in American society, when you earn like $1 million, 2 million, you pay around 29% tax. But then if you earn more, then the amount of tax you pay goes down, because there's all these different ways of getting around it, right? So was it tax avoidance? Yeah, like that. So tax evasion is illegal. Tax avoidance is something slightly different. It's like, hey, I follow the laws, right? So if I found a legal loophole to get away with it, then hey, you can't say anything to me because I haven't done anything wrong technically. So there's a lot that goes on. One of the things we'll talk about today, and I'll read it to you, is what happens karmically to the leader, right? So in our scriptures, it's so deep because it explains how much karma the leader takes on from the people that they're leading, like the king in particular. It talks about what the people are meant to give to the king. And it's interesting also because the kings were normally very dharmic in the Vedic society. One of the qualities that Krishna talks about for the leaders, for the kings, and this is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, is generosity, right? You've heard that before, right? They're generous. It came to me last night that that's necessary, because what happens is if you're going to be given a lot of money in taxes and you're not generous, what will you do with the money that you're given? You'll keep it, right? Or you'll give as little as you possibly can. So one of the qualities of the leaders was to have a certain generosity. So yeah, you've been given all this money in taxes, but you care so much about the people and you're so generous that you will give whatever's necessary for your citizens to come up. We'll get into that in a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by reading something for you. And this is from page 26 of the Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness 2. Okay, and this is an interesting point. And it's around equality, funnily enough. Okay, so let's just read this out. So perhaps it sounds contradictory that Vaishnavas would not see everyone as equal, since Vaishnavas are supposed to be compassionate. Compassion refers to the ability to feel deep sympathy and sorrow for another's suffering or misfortune, accompanied by a desire to alleviate their pain or remove its cause. It's based on the ability to empathize, to experience another's pain as if it were our own. I want to just dig into this before we go on. So we hear this point in our scriptures, Param dukkha dukkhi kripam buddhi. For the devotee, they feel not only the happiness, but they feel the distress of other people. I want you to take a moment and think about this. If you're a leader and you really feel what people are going through, right? So let's think about what's been happening last couple of years, not just actually last couple of years, even now, right? Inflation's gone up, everything's more expensive. Even if you save, the amount of, the value of the money that you're saving, it can buy less and less and less. So first of all, how are people feeling in modern society based on what's happening right now? How are people actually feeling? Thoughts?
Stressed.
Yeah, tell me more. Why stress?
Because you got less income coming in, more output.
Yeah.
Really, the quality of life is going to go down.
Okay, so then there's a lot of pressure, right? You have a family, you need to look after yourself, and you can buy less and less with the money. So you may be working as hard as you can, right? And let's be honest, does the salary go up as much as the inflation goes up? Never, right? So things will become more and more expensive, and the wages, the salary, they don't go up even more. So definitely stress can be there. How else are people feeling, right? We have this inflation crisis, war in Ukraine, so people are concerned. There are many people here who may have friends or family in Russia or Ukraine. I know that there's a huge push. There was a campaign, I think it's ISKCON London, asking if there are people who can allow Ukrainian devotees to come and stay with them. And I know the government is part of a wider thing that the government are doing, and I think they're going to give some like financial support for people who do it. It's an intense time in the world, right? And it's not something that's just happened overnight. It's been an intense time for a long time. Yeah, absolutely. What else are people feeling? Anyone else? Okay, why frustration?
Because you're doing the same amount of work, but doing less.
In my company, they call it more for less, right? And it happens a lot in financial services, right? So they have a team of 5 people and they're getting certain work done. Next year, at some point, someone decides to leave the company, but they don't replace that individual. So now you've got 4 people in the team and you're still expected to get the same amount of work done or even more, right? So it happens a lot. It's this kind of squeeze. So definitely standard of living, quality of life is changing. When I was in India, I was discussing with one devotee how in the Vedic system, it was very different. Actually, Chandramuli Maharaj was sharing this one time. You see, what was meant to happen was there was an emphasis on life, actually living, not working. It was working to live, not living to work, right? So the idea was that you do work hard and you do make a living, but you're doing it so that you can have quality time with your family, you can have quality time with your friends, you can have quality time, especially for your spiritual practice. And it was done in such a way that your mind wasn't so disturbed, right? So that rather than being anxious and in anxiety and nervous about things, you could actually put your mind on the things which are most important, and in that way make spiritual progress. So John Moore, we were speaking about this a while ago, and he was talking about how when society is more natural, then it's like that. You've got a bit more time for the major things because economics is not the goal of life, right? That's something that is one dimension, right? Dharma, artha, karma, and moksha, right? So dharma, religiosity, artha, economic development, karma, sense gratification, and moksha, ultimately, the liberation from that. It's not the whole thing, it's just one aspect. But now it's become more and more everything. Yeah, unfortunately. So definitely people are feeling frustrated. Tune in from your own experience, from people around you. What are people feeling at this time? Yeah, I'll go to Anna and I'm going to come to. Yeah. Yeah. And to be honest, I feel especially for those who have children, because it's not just for us. Then you're also thinking, what kind of society are the younger generation, are your children going to be inhabiting as well? And so that's another key factor as well. And there's many trends which are disturbing, to be honest with you. like trends such as, there's the whole thing about like too much of a push of sexuality on children, especially young children. It's like, what's the point of that? It's like, what is going on? It's just really, it really goes against the spiritual principles. And it's a very interesting thing to note, because actually our philosophy, just like this whole thing about equality, we said there are ultimate spiritual standards. It's not just like, well, you believe in killing animals, we don't, and it's all equal. We say actually that compassion, that non-violence is a higher principle. So if someone believes in killing animals and someone doesn't, it's not like both things are on an equal platform, because there are some things which are actually ordained by the Supreme, ordained by Krishna. And if we follow them, we all flourish. And if we go against them, we all come down, right? I gave class this morning. I was just reflecting on how when I was at college, I had a friend. She was a Christian, very pious lady actually. Her name was Grace, and she was vegetarian. And at the time, I wasn't vegetarian. So when she said to me that she's seen that when people eat animals, they become more aggressive, I couldn't see it. I honestly couldn't. It just did not compute, because I was in that space where my consciousness was covered. So I had no perception of that. But when I became a vegetarian, it's like, yeah, obviously. Then it's like, oh yeah, that's very, very obvious that you're less covered by this kind of aggressive energy, which is being taken in by eating flesh. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Harsha, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think just reflecting about my company. I think the biggest issue is that staff they don't feel they've been understood.
Yeah.
They don't feel safe. I'll give you the example is that once COVID kind of stopped, my CEO said everyone has to be in 3 days a week. So we've gone from 2 years in-house to everyone in the office 3 days a week. That's in my team. There's been problems around childcare. There's issues around how do I get into the office because it's safe on the train. Also, the cost of getting into London is a lot higher now. And we've had a big resign. So since January, we've now had 20 people that resign from my company, and that's all because they're not feeling safe. They're not feeling wanted. They don't feel that the executive team is listening to them. And I think I'm seeing a lot more of that, especially with my customers. But right in front of me, I've lost 3 people in 3 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. There's actually, this is interesting. We were actually looking at this for some things that we were doing at work. It's called, how many of you have heard that before? The Great Resignation. Yeah, some of you have heard that term. So it's a huge thing and it's trending. So what they're finding is that there's a huge mass of people who are just saying, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I don't want this kind of really toxic lifestyle where, under pressure all the time and, like forced to just try to like live hand to mouth. So people are really starting to look in other directions. And many of these big companies, they can't keep their staff, right? Because actually everyone's just saying, look, I've had enough. And it's very, very interesting because that's one of the effects that happens when people are put in a situation where they're not running around as much. It's so interesting. What happened during the pandemic when people weren't so easily distracted, right? Because everything was closed down. You couldn't just go to the pub. You couldn't just, you couldn't be distracted by all the normal things. So what will it force people to do? Everyone just sat and step back and thought, hold on, what the hell am I doing? Like, is this actually the life I want to lead? And it's so interesting because it's sometimes said that there are some forces in society that want to keep people on the treadmill, like the hamster wheel, right? You're just running around, and you never get off that treadmill. And if you got off that treadmill, you suddenly start looking at your life and think, hold on, what is going on here, right? I'm not happy. I'm constantly under stress. There must be an alternative. Like this isn't how, think about when you were young, right? When you were young, is this how you envisioned that your life would be? Because I remember most young people, they don't think about life like this. And that's actually why they're so happy, because it's like, yeah, I'm not thinking that I'm going to just be on this kind of treadmill and, stressed out, going to wake up. You see people on the Monday morning completely looking very, very unhappy. Yeah, so there's always this disconnect. And unless we have more spiritual life, it's not going to change. But yeah, people are starting to vote with their feet. And there's some commentators who are saying that it's going to lead to some real changes.
I think the lead with my company, the leadership has handled it really badly. That they said 3 days you have to be in, there's no consultation. There was no, we're going to listen to our staff. And actually, the staff then wrote a letter. 50 of them got together, wrote a letter. The letter then ended up on Twitter.
Wow.
Because they were so angry with us that we're not listening to what my boss was I think there's a bit of, I feel there's like a revolt happening. I'm seeing it
Absolutely.
in other countries.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's also interesting because you said about protection, about listening, and these are some qualities of leadership. Because one of the ways in which we make sure other people know that they're valued is by actually paying attention to them and listening when they're talking. You see, so linking it back to what the scriptures say, when the leader is proper, they're meant to make people feel valued, and that comes by listening to them, or amongst other things. They also help to make people feel valued by protecting them. Yeah. So you only protect something that you value. So if you don't value people, you won't protect them. Yeah, big thing. What else are people feeling at this time? Yeah.
We've got a few on
Sure.
Zoom. Insecure, worried, anxious, unsafe, traumatized, unloved, uncared, used.
Yeah. Now that's an interesting one. So let's go to a few of those. First of all, used. Who's ever experienced that where they felt used? Interesting. When I was in Govardhaniko village, I was speaking to one person who some of you know. I won't mention their name. And they said something very interesting to me. No, because this person, you look at it and you think very successful, and you can say that they are. And this person told me about some other people that they've been involved in the project with. And they felt, not them actually, it was someone related to them. And the person who was close to them had felt that they had been used, right, not valued properly. And this devotee told me, he said, I told them this, I'll never serve with you guys again. That's what he actually said. And he's still on good terms with them, right? So it's not even it's not like a kind of animosity thing, but he told me, actually, he said, I told them those, I'll never serve with you guys again. And I was reflecting, I think we even discussed, I thought, don't they realize that if you treat people badly, your reputation is going to be destroyed, right? Because they're not going to keep it to themselves. They're going to tell everyone that these people are like this, and then in the future, people don't want to serve with them. So that sense of being used is a very, very strong thing. It's a very negative thing. And these things also start to internalize. So there's a connection between our emotional state and what happens to us physically. Harshal and I were talking about this earlier today. It's a big thing. And we know that from our own tradition. We know that from Ayurveda. We know that even from modern psychology. So actually the entire world, you can say in one level, the entire experience of we're all seeing in the world all boils down to the quality of leadership, right? That's why this is such an important topic. And it's important that everyone knows, even if we're not going to take that position, if we know what the standard is, then we can actually be in a better shape. Linking back to what you said earlier, Jagannath, Sharon, if we know what good leadership looks like, then we can say, yeah, I'll accept that. No, this is going to be a car crash. Yeah. Anything else that people are experiencing? Any things that you've heard about? Yeah.
Just something on the point about use. So I listened to a class by Guru Prabhu this week. And one of the definitions from the Bhagavatam for devotional service describes how it's unmotivated and uninterrupted. So he said, with unmotivated, one thing that you could do is you could express your motivations. So if you're in a position where you're a leader, you can be transparent and tell the person that this is my motivation. In a similar way to how if we get guidance from someone, we can tell them our own biases. So if I'm a Sankirtan devotee and I'm telling someone about service from Pujari, then I can tell them this is my bias, but actually you should take this in light of what I'm saying as well. So there's two sort of considerations.
Yeah. Absolutely, and there's always a context. We always have our own leanings. Ideally, what we want to do, and ideally what a leader would do, and one of the things that Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj talks about in the book is that the leader tries to engage people according to their propensities. You see the point? So it's one thing that he or she's leading, but when they engage someone else, it's like, okay, this is where you should be situated, and this is going to be good for you in the long term. Yeah. Sometimes there are the whole thing about doing the needful, and there's a place for that. There is a place for that. But whenever we have opportunity, we should be thinking that particular way. Anything else? Yes.
Lack of role models.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Tell me more about that.
I was just thinking about the Prime Minister and a few other people getting, they're not really walking the talk.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the role model is a key aspect of a leader's job. Some people say, do as I say, not as I do. But that doesn't work because the actual example speaks more than anything else. So if the leader doesn't set, the leader is actually first and foremost is what they are to be. right? That actually is more important than the other things, because the other things are an expansion of what the leader's character is. So for our own existence as devotees, it's more important what we are than anything else. And we were having a conversation earlier about the importance of working on ourselves. Yeah, I can't stress this enough. And it's not a negative thing, by the way. All of us have strengths and weaknesses. If we were to be honest about those strengths and to play them to the biggest degree, that would be huge. If we were to be honest about the things that we have issues with, right? So I was listening to a seminar called Choosing Love Over Fear. It was given in 2003 by Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj at ISKCON London, so they had the video online. And he talks about 4 stages. He says, name it, face it, feel it, and release it. So the first thing that helps us to navigate anything that's difficult is to label it, right? So what exactly is it? All right, so I have anxiety, right? So I've named it, right? That's the first thing. Then face it means, okay, I'm able to now, I know what it is, I'm able to look at it, right? So face it. What happens when I have anxiety? I tend to push people away. I feel bad about myself. You know, I feel embarrassed about it. It seems like I've got this issue and no one else has, right? So face it. So name it. I know what it is. Face it. I actually look at what's the dynamics that play out. Then feel it. Okay. So let's say it could have even been like, I felt upset with someone, or then you actually go through the emotion, because one of the ways to come out the other side is not to suppress what we feel, right? But to actually go through it. I am upset, right? I had, I'll just share with you, it's interesting. I had a darshan with Radha Maharaj, myself and my wife, and we were in Govardhan Road. And we were talking about many different things. But one thing that he said, which was very interesting, and he was speaking about my spiritual master. And you know, so sometimes people had maybe didn't quite understand his approach. And he told me, he said to me, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, yes, he had this whole, you know, fearless general and so on. He said, but at the same time, he was a very sensitive and very soft person. And he told me, and in the darshan, he said, and he felt hurt when he was misunderstood, right? And he said to me, he said, so therefore, there's nothing wrong with feeling hurt if you're misunderstood. And I thought it was a very, very human thing to say, very natural thing to say, because what happens if we haven't seen this example properly, we tend to think that expressing emotions, even if they're negative ones that we're feeling, is somehow a weakness, or it's not transcendental, right? And then what happens is then what the worst thing we can do is suppress that feeling. And when that feeling is suppressed, it doesn't go away. It comes back even stronger eventually, right? Has anyone ever seen that? You're angry, but you feel, I shouldn't be angry. So you just kind of push it down, but the anger doesn't go. It actually comes back. Then it comes like a rage later on, right? Rather than actually acknowledging, actually, I'm upset, you know? Whatever we feel, we want to acknowledge that. We don't just fuel it. So there's 3 different ways of dealing with it. We can either unregulated unleashing of that negative emotion, or thoughtless repression. Or we can actually just acknowledge it, mode of goodness. I am feeling this. I'm going to work through it. Acknowledging it, feeling it, I come through the other side. So name it, face it, feel it. And then the last stage, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj talked about, is release it. By going through these 3 stages, we come out the other side. Yeah. And it's funny, but many of the issues that people have, it's actually due to repressed negative emotions. There's a wonderful speaker, guru, Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj. He has some phenomenal classes. And I remember he said in one class, he said sometimes, or at least according to Ayurveda, I'm not sure if it's always the case, so let's be very clear, but sometimes dementia is due to anger that's been continually repressed over a long period of time. Isn't that interesting? Right? So again, the subtle aspect is that there are many subtle causes. And if we try to live in a more healthy, holistic way, we won't have these issues, because we'll actually be true, we'll be honest. But the spiritual life is one of the biggest things for healing this. Right? So don't think it's something we have to do separately. The chanting, the hearing, the reading, the discussion, the open honesty in good association, the 6 loving exchanges, which include revealing the mind, inquiring confidentially, all of these things make a difference. It's a question of how we profoundly apply it. Yeah. So it's one thing to have the teachings, it's another thing to live the teachings and apply it properly. The more we do it properly, the more you change. And I want you to just do this as an experiment. Just take a moment to meditate in your own life. What would your life be if your heart was a bit lighter? And you know what I mean by that, right? You didn't hold on to some grudges. You weren't still upset with someone. You kind of got things out of your system. Yeah. Because one day we'll be at the end of our life and we don't want to be carrying baggage. We don't be carrying, oh, that person, they did this when I was, 15, or, whatever resentments that are still anchoring us to the past. Yeah. So the way that we do that is by applying the process properly and being authentic in Krishna consciousness. And if you're struggling to be authentic in Krishna consciousness, then you may need to look at why. Yeah. Who do I need to surround myself with so I can be open? Because the more that we can be open and honest in our association, it makes your heart lighter, right? Because you sometimes meet people, let's be honest, we've all seen it. You meet some people, you can see they're just weighed down with life, right? And if you've known them for a long time, you remember back in the day, they were very bright, enthusiastic. Now it's kind of like just carrying like a burden. And you can feel that, you know what I'm talking about. And you can feel the difference. It's kind of like they've just kind of been worn down. And it's like carrying a whole sack of issues on the back. I'll tell you something really interesting. I met this person I think he's a psychologist. And he was, because I'd seen some videos also, he had some videos that he did. And he was telling me about one technique that he'd used. And it's a very interesting technique. And basically, without going into all the detail, what he would do is he would get people to imagine that they had this rucksack on. And in the rucksack, so in the visualization, get them to imagine that they had this rucksack on. And in the visualization, it's all right, now stop, take off this rucksack. And he said, I'm going to ask you to open up the rucksack. And I want you to examine the things that you're carrying in the rucksack. And examine and see, what things, if the things are no longer valuable, you can just leave them, you can just take them out. And what he told me, which is very interesting, is when he did this technique, the rucksack is a metaphor for the subconscious mind, right? And those things which a person was carrying in the rucksack were issues, resentments, experiences, stuff that was weighing them down, right? So the rucksack is the subconscious, and the things in there are the stuff that's weighing us down from our past. And so in this visualization, when he gets them to take things out, then what they found was, after people did that kind of visualization activity, I mean, obviously you have to do it in a specific kind of way, so I don't know all the details around it. But what people found after they did that activity is that they were much more psychologically light, right? It's as if something had just been they'd let go of some stuff. And we're all in that space. We're all in that space where there's things that we need to let go of, not for the sake of letting go, but because it's holding us back from being the person that we can be, right? And that's why also when you see very advanced devotees, Prabhupada, many of our gurus, you see that they carry a certain lightness. Right? One person who really comes to mind like that is Sachinanda Maharaj. He's got this kind of youthful, joyful energy, thinking he's over 65 years old. How is that possible? But it's a lightness because they've been able to let go of stuff. And so linking it to everything you've been saying, this is why Krishna consciousness is so practical, right? But again, it comes back to the same thing, is to practice it properly. Right? It's to go deeper. Because I remember my spiritual master saying this, the way the world is going, things will become so intense that people have to be spiritual just to function as human beings. Yeah, not to get this worn down feeling where, and now you can see it creeping into the younger generation. They're young, but they can feel like they're carrying so much. So there's ways of letting it go. On a practical level, one of the things that happen is that by spiritual knowledge, we become a bit detached. So we don't take things so seriously. We see a situation with a different framing, a different context, right? So a materialist someone's rude to you. A materialistic person thinks, oh, why are they saying that? And it triggers some real negativity. Someone who's a bit more spiritual is like, maybe they had a bad day, right? It's not personal, right? Even though they're shouting at me, I know it's not about me, because the way that this person is responding is disproportionate to what I said or did. So I know it can't be about me. It must be about other stuff that's happened to them that's triggering them. Does that make some sense? Yeah, so there's so many benefits like that. Anything else that people, Mitchell, experiencing.
Looking around and there's a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
People are, rather than having hope, they try to survive.
Absolutely. And that's a really dangerous thing. What happens, let me throw this out to all of you. What happens in the life of a person who has no hope for a better future? How that affect the way that they act, the way that they interact, the way that they think, and the way that they orient their lives. If a person thinks there's no hope, absolutely, it's debilitating. It's the ultimate limiting belief, right? Life is not going to get better at all, right? From there, the mentality is, why should we bother trying? Yeah. And then, of course, if the person stops trying, do things get better? They only get worse, right? So the agency that we did have, the capacity to make a difference that we did have, now we've even given up on that, right? And surely the situation will just go down and down. So yeah, that's the worst, that's the most dangerous thing about Kali Yuga. But for devotees, it's different, because we're not depending upon the external situation if we have more of a connection to Krishna. How many of you have had this experience? How many of you have had the situation where there was something you needed or something you were wondering about, and somehow Krishna entered into your life and you just got, either you got the guidance or the experience, or someone even just came to help you and it just dropped out of the sky? How many of you have ever seen that in your spiritual life? Right. Yeah. And that's a good thing to remember from time to time. How many times Krishna has actually reached out and helped us, because Krishna isn't under the control of Kali Yuga. He's not under the control of the material energy. The material energy is under his control. So he can always help his devotees. I saw Parashuram, one devotee, and he'd gone to Ukraine actually to do some prashadam distributions. I saw him on Harinam yesterday, right? Dancing and everything like that. So they'd gone, and I heard that the prashadam distribution in Ukraine is phenomenal, right? They're distributing huge amounts of prashadam, helping so many people, and it's a war-torn situation. Yeah. So there's a lot that's going on. The devotees, if we take this Krishna consciousness more and more seriously, we become less and less influenced by whatever's happening in this Kali Yuga, right? And I mean that. What happens is there'll be some karma that we have, which it won't even come to us. Yeah, because we're practicing this. Krishna's like, well, yeah, she doesn't need to experience that. Just let it go. Yeah. So again, it's practical. And the leader, to the point that was made earlier, the leader is meant to role model this. Because otherwise, how do people have faith? They need to see someone, he's doing it. This person's doing it, and I can see things are going really well for him. Right. So that can give me some faith to take this a bit deeper, a bit more seriously, so that I can also start to get those benefits in my own life. Make sense? Okay, let me just read on a few more things and then we'll stop. Okay, so this is page 27. Okay, Vaishnavas see equality in its most profound sense. Equality to a Vaishnava means that each living entity is an eternal spirit soul, part and parcel of God. And this is the basis of each person's sameness. Okay, so it's a deeper sense of equality. It's a deeper sense of equality. So like the parent and the child, they're equal spiritually, but the parent, a good parent's not going to let the child do whatever she wants, right? The parent's like, no, you're going to go in this direction, because she cares about the parent, and the good parent recognizes naturally that difference. Yeah, we're equal in spirit soul, but at this point in time, I'm your mom. I'm going to make sure that you do this because I want to see you grow up in a healthy and mature way, right? Prabhupada tells this story about this child who was allowed to do whatever they wanted. I think some of you heard this story, right? So the child ended up becoming like a criminal, stealing, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the child got captured, and on the day of court, they had to go to court. The child was being sentenced to prison, and then before the child was going to prison, he called for his mom, and so she thought, oh, he's going to give me one last hug before they send him away, all that kind of stuff. So she comes up to the child, he bit her on the ear. Yeah, and he said, that's what you get for allowing me to do whatever I wanted. Yeah. So that sense of parental concern is actually a quality of leadership. A leader sees that all the citizens in the community are like their own family members, like their own children. And they're meant to look after them with that same intensity of care. And when that's done, people can feel it, right? How many of you can have that? How many, to be honest, how many of you, you can tell when someone genuinely has your best interest at heart? Yeah? Okay, raise your hands if you can pick that up. Okay, how? Right? And I'm gonna, anyone, I'd like to hear from you. How can you tell? What's the difference between the person who's trying to charm you, you know, say the right things, and the person who actually, you know, they really care? Yes, Anna.
They might even repeat what you say, so they understand truly, so they get the best result.
Yeah, absolutely. So they understand your context. So there's a big thing on that, listening to respond as opposed to listening to listen. Yeah. So if I'm listening to respond, I already have my dialogue. I already know what I'm going to say. So I'm not really paying attention to you. I'm just paying attention to the pause when I can jump in. But listening to actually listen is, I've got to actually care about the person in order to do that. And I've got to be able to put aside my own agenda to actually really tune into what the person's saying. Thank you for that. Who else had a comment? I'll come to Anna and I'll come to Kanchanabja. Now that's I really find that one interesting, right? Because in this age, you get all kinds of crazy stuff going on, including a huge amount of flattery and charm. So why would not telling people just what they want to hear be a sign of act? Why could it be a sign of deep compassion?
They want to give you the best advice, even though it may just temporarily
Yeah. So you mean I'm not God? Oh my God! How can you say that to all your friends? You know, like. But yeah, that's the job of the devotees. You know, dudes, you're not gods. You're not the enjoyer. You're not the controller. You're not even happy. Like, so you need to do something different. So that's absolutely true. And it does take a deep level of compassion. Sometimes people have an issue with some Prabhupada's heavy statements. But Prabhupada, that's where he's coming from. Right? He cares so deeply for the individual that he just wants them to act. He can see where they are and he can see where they're meant to be. He can see that they're not happy. And he can see that actually you're meant to be in a state of constant ecstasy. And you're just struggling in this world and you're growing old and you're dying and you're being diseased and you're going to take birth again. This is beneath your level. And so out of that compassion, he wants to actually help the person to understand, stop doing what you're doing because this is not going to make you happy. Yeah, absolutely. Who else? I'm catching up to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, the person who's giving us the advice, they put aside their own agenda. You can see that the advice they're giving will not help them in any certain way, or maybe even if they may give us advice that will actually put their project, will burn out their project because they need you, but actually all they care about is you. Yeah. So putting aside their own self-interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a selflessness to that. And also that's another quality of a good leader, that they're concerned for the well-being of the people that they're leading. It doesn't become a kind of, let me use and exploit people because I've got something else that I want to achieve. And that doesn't work in the long term anyway, because in the long term, when people feel that they've been exploited, it causes such a backlash that you actually get less in the long term. Yeah.
I heard devotees saying about Tribhuvan that he was really expert at this. He just cared about the devotees who wanted to serve so much that even if it meant a festival didn't happen or a tour didn't happen, but he cared so much just about the devotees and their own well-being.
Absolutely. And I remember many times the people around Tribhuvan, they were really sold out to Tribhuvan. I think many of us, remember Tribhuvan. I mean, they were really like loyal to him because he was loyal to them. And it's the same thing with Prabhupada. They were loyal. People are serving Prabhupada to this day. He left the world in 1977, right? So that's a long time ago. And to this day, people are loyal to him, serving him. It's because they could actually see this person really cares about me. And in the early days, especially the way that Prabhupada would make sacrifices, sleeping hardly sleeping, doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, right? He had disciples who were on drugs, who would actually even sometimes threaten his life, and he'd just carry on. He had disciples who stole things from him, right? And he would take them back. Yeah, and so you just kind of like see how many things he went through, and it just shows the depth of his love for people, yeah. So when you see that either in the person's interaction with you or in their interaction with others, it tells you something about the quality of leadership. Thank you. Was there anyone else who had a comment? Jagna, Sharon, then I'll go to Sanjay.
I was going to say, I think you know somebody cares about you when
Yeah.
okay. We just none of us have this currency of time.
Yeah.
So free. So if you give any amount of time, then that really demonstrates most profoundly how much you care about. So I think that's strongly.
Absolutely. Especially when people have so many things that they are trying to deal with and balance in their own life. To squeeze out time, and space and time and attention together, it becomes even more difficult. And don't think that this is a norm. The way that the Kali Yuga is now, this is in previous ages, it wasn't actually like this. In previous ages, people didn't have like their mobile phone, coming on every 5 seconds. And so they had less disturbed minds. And the life was more around actually interacting with individuals, nurturing each other, practicing spirituality, and of course, as I said, working in order to maintain that. So unfortunately, we're in a very, very different space. People sometimes think this is how it's always been. No, it's not how it's always been. Sanjay, you had a comment. Yes.
It's not that the encouragement support is met, but they'll let you know like what is like what their skills is. So it won't be like they're trying to do over and have the skill set there, maybe put somewhere else.
Yeah. So this is actually a big thing though, because it links to trust. It's the ability to have clear expectations. I knew one devotee couple and they broke up. And they were from different places in the world. They're both Indian, but they were from different places in the world. And so they had different upbringing and different expectations. And the lady told me, she said, your friend, he said, he's not a gentleman at all. That's what she told me. And she said, she talked about how they were abroad and it was late one evening. And she said, he couldn't even be bothered to walk me back to where I was staying. And I was a bit surprised because he seemed like he's a nice guy and I knew him. So I mentioned, I mentioned it to him and I said that she said this and he said, I asked her, do you want me to walk you back to where you're staying? She said, don't bother. That's what he said. Yeah, I was getting confused at this time, right? So I mentioned that to her. He said that he asked you and you said, don't bother. And she said, yeah, I did say that. She said, but the way I grew up, it's just a respectful and gentlemanly thing for the man to walk the woman back to where she's staying, right? And I thought, okay, fair enough. And I mentioned that to him. He said, yeah, I get it. He said, but the way I grew up, when the girl tells you to leave her alone, you leave her alone. You understand? Right? And it really speaks to this point. Everyone has these expectations and we often don't talk about it, right? We think that our expectations are quote unquote normal. But if we're around people who've got a very different upbringing, background, experience, even generationally, right? The expectations of millennials may be different to the expectations of people who are like older generations. So if we're not having that dialogue, I may just assume that of course, that's normal, but it's not normal to you. It's just in my mind, and we haven't clarified or communicated. And then if that expectation isn't met, then I can actually become really upset. Oh, they didn't do this for me. They didn't do that. They didn't. No, they may not have done it on purpose. It may have just been that they just didn't know. Did you convey that expectation? Did you ask? So it's really, really important. And that's one of the key things which causes relationships to fall apart. Big time, right? Differences of expectations for whatever reason, gender, age, nationality. I was speaking to someone, in the Govardhanika village, and I was speaking to one devotee, he's not from India, and they were complaining about something. And I said, but I think, because what happened was, something that they thought was private about their treatment was being spoken about in a room where other people were present, so they were thinking, blah, blah, blah. And what I explained to them is that actually, but the person who's saying that, from their cultural perspective, this is not confidential, so it's just a question of making sure that they know what I prefer, that my details aren't spoken of, and they were completely happy to do that. But if I assume that what I expect is just the same, even though different cultures have very different ways of doing things, And I can be upset, and even the person's like, I don't know, like, what are you upset about? I don't quite get it. Because we come in with these default ideas of what normal looks like. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to carry on reading. So let's go to page 28, because I want to read a little bit about divine monarchs. Okay, so this is the value of a divinely inspired monarch. So monarchy in its most wonderful sense is sacred rule. Vaishnavas appreciate monarchy in its purest sense. For such a system upholds a king who rules, and this is really important, who rules on behalf of the Supreme Lord. A king who follows scriptural authority, his spiritual advisors, and his divinely inspired predecessor kings will offer knowledge of right and wrong, as well as time-tested techniques of spiritual leadership that work. This cancels the need for speculation about what policies are just, what is good for people, and what is the highest concern. Okay. People are of different grades according to their inherent natures and developed qualities. Thus, an enlightened God-conscious monarch is needed to guide the people towards a higher goal in life and to represent the people's spiritual needs. So this is really important. Whenever we want to do something, we're looking for guidance, right? We're looking, and we know this, right? So in life, we go to an expert in some area. Whether it's, you want some financial advice, or you want to buy a house, or, you need some legal advice, or, you need some medical advice, we go to an expert because it's natural. Someone who studied it more than we have, knows it more than we have, we can get the benefit. Yeah. So this idea is in that sense that when people have something, then in a society which is functional and healthy, they're going to use what they have for the benefit of everyone. And they're not going to abuse it. And it's the same idea of a divine monarch. If the person is qualified to lead, no problem. Because if you have a divinely inspired monarch, he or she is going to make sure that everyone is protected, everyone's treated fairly. I'm curious to ask this. Have you ever moved away from a project or a group because you felt you were not being treated fairly? Has anyone ever been in that space? Okay, a few of us, right? Very, very interesting. And this speaks to justice. And it also speaks how justice is connected to community, right? If you want a community where people can work together, they're only going to do it if they feel they're being treated fairly. If they feel that actually, if someone treats me badly, they're going to be allowed to get away with it because they've got more money or this or that, then the people are going to start to feel, you know what, I can't give myself fully because I'm doing the best that I can, but it's not going to be appreciated or respected. And that's where you start to get people, even in the group, they can disengage. They can be around each other physically, but think, you know what, I'm not going to give myself fully to this because I can see some favoritism, I can see some unfair treatment. So it's a big thing. That's why also I was telling a friend of mine, who I'm actually going to speak to later today, that with the leaders, it was automatically connected to community. Real leadership in the sense that's being described here was connected to community, because when you have good leadership, people feel that they can work together, right? They feel they're all being valued. All right, so you've got money, we're going to value that because you can engage it. You've got time and energy, we're going to value that because you can engage it. You care about people, make people feel valued, we're going to engage that, we care about it. So it's not that one thing's valued. Everything that a person can actually give is meant to be valued. You see the point? Whatever the person can give, it's not that everyone's wealthy, right? It's not that everyone is, let's say, good at acting or singing. It's not that everyone is good at management and organization. Different people have different talents. And the way that Krishna's created the entire material world, he's done it in such a way that you're forced to do what? Think about it like this. Does community just require one thing? It requires many things. And at the same time, we know that different people are good at different things. So the only way to have a real community is if everyone does what? Cooperate and work together, right? That's the whole point. So it's meant to be such that the leader inspires a sense of mutual appreciation. You see how it works? If everyone can see that what they can offer is actually appreciated, it makes a big difference. And one thing that I feel so strongly about, and my Guru Maharaj spoke about it as well, and I think I understand it a little bit better now than I did in the past. So for example, the role of women traditionally, right? I remember being at some program and some person was saying, oh, all I do is look after the kids. And I thought, no, this is where the problem lies. Because that's such a big service. It's such a powerful service. It's such a hard service. It takes so much physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, in terms of time. And I was thinking, why is it we have a society where these things aren't done in the way that they could? And it's because if the leadership don't show appreciation for that, then what we're basically saying, yeah, it's nice to do that, but you know, yeah, but what else are you doing? Like, yeah, that's nice, it's on the side, but like, what's your real work, right? And is that the message that we want to send? The reason why there's so much issues around mental health in the modern society is because the nurturing qualities have been minimized, right? They've been played down. It's not really important. And therefore, because they've been played down, they're not expressed so much. And because they're not expressed so much, we now have people, we have a society full of adults who still have patterns from their childhood which are not resolved. Yeah. So this is one of the things that a real leader does. Again, linked to community, linking to the idea that appreciate people for what they can bring. Not that I appreciate one thing. Whatever the person can offer, that should be appreciated. That's what they have. And the quintessential story is the Ramayana. So when Hanuman is throwing these boulders to create this bridge to Lanka, there's also some other creatures who are just doing very small things. And Hanuman basically tells this creature, he said, just get out of the way, let the big guys do their stuff, right? But Lord Ram immediately chastises him. He says, no, you're offering according to your capacity. They're also offering according to their capacity. Yeah? That kind of vision and that type of appreciation makes for real leadership. Yeah. So one of the things you can pick up from this is you can tell real leadership by its ability to foster real community. Yeah. Because trained leaders, natural leaders are naturally appreciative of the different qualities, skills, talents, and offerings that different members of our community are able to make. So no one feels like they're the ugly duckling. You know, oh, you know, he's good at cooking, but I can't cook. No, but you can do something else, right? And what we're valuing is the fact that you're doing what you can do. Yeah. And of course, that will change over time, right? When we're young, we've got more time and energy. Married with kids, you may have less time in terms of doing that because you've got other responsibilities, no problem. But they're doing what they can do, fantastic. And when people feel appreciated, no one feels that I'm minimized, even though I'm trying my best. So that's, of course, the other side for us is that we should be doing the best we can, right? So it's not one side. We are doing the best we can, and the people who are administering the society, the community, is appreciating what people can actually bring. Those two things together make for a harmonious community. Yeah. Let's read on, and then let's see how we're doing for time, and we'll stop. Okay, we'll just share a few more things. So this is page 30. Okay, now I'll just share this. I won't actually read it because I was looking at this earlier. There was a very interesting point that Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj makes. So there's a contrast between the Bhagavatam and what happened and the conversation there and the Mahabharata. Very interesting contrast. So in the Bhagavatam, you have Pariksit Maharaj, who's a king, he's about to die. Okay, and so he wants to know what should the person be doing or thinking about when they know they're about to die. And of course, the subtext is, we're all about to die. We don't know when we're going to leave. Now, that's an interesting contrast because in this conversation between Bhishma Dev and Yudhisthira, Bhishma Dev is leaving, but Yudhisthira is about to ascend the throne. He's about to become the emperor of the entire planet, by the way. Right? So what happens is, and you'll see this again through the scriptures, at the most, what's the word I'm looking for? At the most intense or dangerous time, the most powerful and relevant and significant teaching is given, right? Both cases, someone's about to die, they're on the battlefield, right? In the case of Bhishma Dev, and then this teaching is given. So this is considered to be one of the most important conversations that are there in the Vedic literatures because of the intensity of the situation. It's war, someone's about to die. So it's not just someone, it's not like a foot soldier. This is grandfather Bhishma Dev, okay? Yudhisthira Yudhisthira, at the time of this conversation, he was heartbroken. And that's another quality of a great leader. They must be soft-hearted. Yeah? A great leader must be soft-hearted. Yudhisthira, and this is mentioned in the first canto of Bhagavatam as well, Yudhisthira was heartbroken. He saw how many people had died and he just couldn't console himself because he was also considering there are so many women and children who, like the women will be widows, the child will be fatherless because of all these people who've been killed on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Even Krishna couldn't console Yudhisthira. He couldn't console him. So then he empowered Bhishma Dev to actually speak these words which Yudhisthira heard. So it's a very, very deep, it's actually a very emotional situation, a very deep, intense conversation. So much is there in that regard. And then we'll just touch upon one other point. I'll just read a little bit from this and then we'll maybe stop for questions. So this chapter is entitled, Why is a King Necessary? Well, actually, let me throw it out to you first. What's the benefit of a king or leader? Why do we need leaders? Yes.
To catalyze everyone else.
Okay, great stuff. So to bring all that contribution together in a way which is cooperative and allow something to happen. Why else? Why else is a leader necessary? Yeah, absolutely. So the role modeling piece to show what should be done. Anything else? Why is a leader necessary? What does a leader provide? Okay, direction is definitely there.
Unify the purpose.
Okay, interesting. Shared sense of purpose. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's like you have all these different people in society that all have different roles, but they're working towards a leader will give direction to everybody, and you can feel that community as a community unified purpose. The ultimate goal everyone is working for is a different goal.
Absolutely. So this shared sense of purpose is very important because everyone is a unique individual. So there's diversity there. And without a shared sense of purpose, we also undermine that sense of unity. Let me get you to do this activity. Before I give you the answer to this, I want you to think carefully about this question, and I'm going to ask you to share it with someone who's next to you. When community is good, when community is wholesome, what do you actually stand to gain? All right, so think about this carefully. I'll say this again in a slightly different way because I want to really meditate on this. Think about yourself when you have to struggle without community, right? Or struggle in false community, right? So community which is not real community. And just think about the difference between that and when you're in actual community of people that you know, and we're not being idealistic. We're not saying that you trust everyone, know everyone, not like that. But where you have sufficient, healthy, mature, loving relationships, okay? When you or anyone is in that kind of consistent, real community, what's the difference? Okay, I'm going to give you about, let's say 8 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, and I want you to discuss in your pairs what happens, what's different when we're together in real, healthy community, right? What changes about us? You know, how does it help us, or what issues are released? Whatever it is, what's the difference? Make sense? Okay, 8 to 10 minutes with someone who's close to you, and then we'll reconvene. Yeah.
I don't want to be
Pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, I think it's about when you're amongst similar people, reaffirms your sense of identity. So I remember, like, for example, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, not being in the association of devotees and coming back into kirtan, it reaffirms that sense of placement. Like, oh, you're sharing a similar feeling, you're sharing a common idea, you know, you're sharing a common energy. So all of that starts to come back. Whereas when you're isolated, you know, you're in a community that is disjointed. You don't get that sense of your identity isn't sharp, it's not grounded. So in a good community.
That makes complete sense. And I want to thank you for that. I didn't think about that actually until you mentioned it, because it's a really profound thing. I've seen over many years when people leave Krishna consciousness, oftentimes it's because there's a lack of a sense of identity. So identity actually determines all the other decisions that we make, right? Our decisions are based on who we think that we are. So if we're not connected to a community which reaffirms a higher identity, then what happens is it can be a slippery slope. Because then if I'm not affirming that I'm a devotee, therefore I should dedicate my life in this way, then the identity will become more and more mundane. And then it's just like, yeah, just do other things. It's not important because I'm losing my sense of spiritual identity. So it's a really, really big thing. And it actually makes it easier to practice Krishna consciousness if you have your identity reaffirmed. Because it's kind of like, I know who I am. I remember hearing in one lecture that for people to be confident, they need an identity. If a person's like, yeah, I know who I am, it's easier to make decisions, make choices that I know what I'm meant to do. Because if this is who I am, this is what I should be doing. But if it starts to become more and more material and mundane again, then it parallels a kind of laxness. Well, you know, I'm the body, or I'm this group, I'm that group. If it becomes more mundane, what becomes slackened, I'll just switch this. Give me 1 second. What becomes slackened is also the endeavor. So it's a much deeper thing, right? And it's really important. We want to be in those loving exchanges where we reaffirm our spiritual identity, where we remind each other, actually, I'm a devotee, right? And because I'm a devotee, this is what I should be doing. And so just to encourage you, this is why it's good to have these conversations, we learn from each other. Think about how do you strengthen your identity as a devotee? What can you do? Who can you be around? What are some activities that strengthen your identity as a devotee? Because if we don't strengthen our identity as a devotee, we'll become more and more materialistic. We'll identify more like the body, and then all the difficulties that modern society faces because of bodily identity, they'll become more and more part of our lives as well. So we're making our life more difficult if we don't reinforce and strengthen the fact that, yeah, I'm not this body. I'm a spirit soul. I'm a servant of Krishna. So great point. Thank you for that. So someone else, what were you talking about? The benefits. When there's real community, healthy community, what's the value add that we get? I'll come to Maharani Radhika and I'll come to Kanchanabji.
Feeling empowered.
What do you mean by that?
We talked about Prabhupada's example, how he sent those to different parts of the world.
Yes.
They're really young, they didn't know where they were going. But under his leadership and guidance, he empowered them to go and preach or distribute books in places that were.
Absolutely. And that's again linking this idea. We need to feel some strength and some enthusiasm to do something. So I really want to encourage you, look, life is short. If you have choice, seek out people who fill your cup. Does that make sense? Right? Life is short. And don't expect it to fall in your lap. Trust me, it doesn't work that way, right? Because Maya's going to make sure it doesn't fall in your lap. But seek out people who give you a bit more fuel in your tank. Yeah? Because life is difficult. But what happens, this is interesting. Life can be challenging, but it depends on what's inside you. If your tank is full, that long journey, you can make it. If your tank is empty, your car's going to stop. It's not going to go very far. Yeah? But it doesn't happen by accident. Yeah? We're all making these choices day to day, including the choice not to do anything. Yeah? That's also a choice, right? I didn't bother. Okay, great. Life's going to be difficult for you, right? Someone else, there was a fuel crisis. Remember that time recently where and what happened was, I remember I was with Bhakti Gamya and we drove to the petrol place and she just wanted to fill the tank because there was a bit of a fuel crisis. They were having trouble getting the fuel, and she's like, make sure we top up because it may not be, it may be a bit hard to get access. So it's the same thing. In spiritual life, it can't, Prabhupada said you have to become conscious before you can become Krishna conscious. It's not going to happen by accident, right? But it's going to happen by the choices that we make, right? I'm going to deliberately go here and make sure I get that association. I'm going to make sure I read that book. Yeah, if you struggle with a habit, I'm going to make sure I do it with another devotee, right? Because he's enthusiastic about it, even if I'm not. So we'll do it together, right? Yeah. That way the enthusiasm spills over. But think about that point for yourself. What could you do that makes sure that you are in the best possible position that you need to be, so your tank is full? Yeah, please think about that. Great point. So we talked about the identity, we talked about empowerment. What else? What else do you get when there's real community? Anyone else want to share something? What did you talk about?
Belonging.
Yeah, why is that important?
because if you don't have belonging, we can feel really isolated. And if you've got a sense of belonging, then there's a reason that we're doing this together. That whole feeling of cooperation.
Yeah.
I belong to serve. I live to serve, and we're doing like you just said, that find the association. If we have that belonging, then that association is available.
It's a big thing. People need to feel part of a family. And it's a spiritual thing, because the soul is in Goloka Vrindavan, no one's hanging out by themselves, right? It's not like that. It's all in community with Krishna in the center, right? People need to feel. I was in Mayapur, and I spoke to one devotee, and his parents were devotees, everything like that. His sister had become a Christian. Yeah, seriously. And he told me why. She became a Christian. He said that what has he said to me? He said that she didn't have an outlet for all their talents and skills, right? So I think therefore she didn't feel that same sense of belonging. And then there was other groups who like, you can join us, blah, 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 we'll accept you. And for want of that sense of being part of something, it's like, okay, I'm going to become a Christian. So it's a big thing. This is a principle that in spiritual life, we're still haven't gone through the human experience while we're trying to become transcendental. So it's very, very important that we're conscious of our human needs, and that we're conscious to engage those human needs properly in devotional service, in connection to Krishna, right? I often tell people this quote, which I find really interesting. Prabhupada once told one devotee, he said, don't try to become more of a Paramahamsa than me. And I've seen that a lot, right? It's almost like we're trying to be so transcendental. It's like, well, you're sick. Yeah, but I'm not the body problem. Yeah, but you're sick, right? And you are feeling it, and it is disturbing you. So go and see a doctor, get it sorted out, right? So we can't fake transcendence. Transcendence is it's a journey that we go on. But at any point in the journey, we have to be real about where we are and what we need to move forward. And it's that I've seen it again and again. It's that type of being out of touch with where we are on the journey, thinking that we're above a certain platform, whatever, that it can often cause issues. Now, at the same time, it doesn't mean that we do things in a mundane sense. Genuine needs can be done in a Krishna conscious way. There's no need to leave Krishna consciousness to take care of these genuine needs, right? But it's a question of making sure that unity is there. And of course, don't take this as an excuse not to do the best we can in Krishna service. We're doing this so we can do the best we can in Krishna service. Right? So it's not an either or, it's a both and. Yeah, and as long as we do that, things will actually move in a healthy direction. I think we're going to stop at this point. The last thing I'm going to ask you is, it's almost 1 o'clock. But it being true to this idea of, we've touched upon many things, you shared many things, which are all very, very good. I'm always thinking about the emphasis my spiritual master had on application. So the last thing I'm going to ask you to do, and we'll give you 5 minutes to do this in pairs, what are you going to take away? Okay, so it's got to be practical. Something that you're going to practically take away, do differently based upon the actual discussion we've had, right? So it could be about needs, it could be about being proactive to plug in to community in a healthy way, whatever it is. But I want you to share, and I'm asking you to share on purpose. According to neuroscience, when you publicly state what you're going to do to another person, it greatly amplifies the likelihood that you will follow through on what you said. You see, if it stays in your mind, no one heard it. If you don't follow through, it's not such a big deal. But when you've told someone else that I'm going to do this, right, it puts a little bit more loving pressure on you to make sure that you actually make that step forward. Okay. And our spiritual journey, it's really the accumulation of these tiny but significant steps. Don't think small things are small things. Small things can make big, big differences. I've seen some devotees, their whole spiritual life took off just because of a change of association, right? Or because I'm going to regularly plug into the Sangha, or I'm going to start chanting, right? These things are invested in so much power because the devotional practices, they're Krishna himself. That chanting is Krishna. The Bhagavatam is Krishna. So we may think I'm just reading a book for 5 minutes, but actually you're associating with the supreme all-powerful person. Krishna in the form of that book. Yeah. So small things are very significant. So 5 minutes in your pairs. What have you taken away? What are you actually going to do? And it could be that you'll do something even more. That's fine, right? Or maybe something, you know what, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this consistently. Or I'm not doing this well. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, so practical, something that you're going to do. You can just tell one other person close to you, 5 minutes, and then we'll close. Over to you. Okay, so if I could have your attention, please. So we're at the end of the session. What I'm going to do is just read you Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj's answer to this heading as a close. So we actually, before we had this last conversation, we were asking why is the king necessary? We shared some points about why leadership is required. So in page 31 of this book, he says, a king is necessary because people are sinful. In a perfect society, a king would not be needed because there will be no need to enforce rules and regulations. People would follow them of their own accord. And therefore, no need for protection. So everyone would act properly. As both conditioning and nature cause people to act simply, people require the guidance and protection afforded by a pious king. And this is the last point, and so we'll end on this. A king's duty, and this relates to why we talk about community, a king's duty is to create a culture that will stimulate people to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. Okay, so I'll repeat that. A king's duty is to create a culture that will stimulate people to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. So in one sense, that's the essence of good leadership. Okay, so thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, so we'll continue in the next session. Okay, cool.